Okay, bit of an experiment this. I've been doing some thinking over the last few months about how we might make decisions about what sorts of cloud approach might be appropriate in what business circumstances. And I'm drawing some of this from stuff that I've known actually for over 10 years now from some work from John Ward and Joe Peppard at Cranfield, and also more recently the American writer Geoffrey Moore. And it basically tries to distill this down into a nice simple 2 by 2 matrix, the stock in trade of the management consultant. And I guess that in the last few weeks, I've been thinking a bit more about the way in which different cloud models have a necessity for thinking about the consumption of services. So the more you use, the more you pay for. And now working for a software company, also thinking about how that means that software companies need to encourage usage of systems, which in the past software companies have just needed to sell licenses and not really had much concern about the way in which that sits in terms of people actually using the services. If you think this is going to be like one of the RSA Animate beautiful animation things, then think again. As my art teacher told me, I can't draw, but hopefully the whiteboard on this will just help to illustrate my thinking a bit. So thinking about the dimensions of a particular business service or software solution, however you want to call it, the two dimensions that I'm trying to articulate here, first of all, around whether something is generating revenue or not. So you've got services that will actually directly generate revenue for an organization, and you will have some services that are supporting activities, and those may be within business units that are actually fee earning or revenue generating. They might be in support areas of the business. So that gives us one set of dimensions here, and then the other set of dimensions are based around whether the particular thing that's being done is core business activity, so whether it is something that the business has at the core of what it does, or whether it's non-core, which is a bit of a cop-out term, but you hopefully get the idea. So we end up as a result of that with these four sectors that we can start to be able to think about how we might approach choosing appropriate cloud solutions as a result of where particular business needs sit. Now, before I go any further on this, I should point out that this doesn't take account of things like regulation. So where companies have to make sure that things are on-site, on-premise for legal compliance reasons, this is separate from that and doesn't really take that into account. And I think my underpinning views on this is actually that a lot of the legislation that we find today, take for example data protection legislation in the UK now, it's not really that relevant to the world we find ourselves in. But that's going to take a long for the legislators to be able to sort out. Anyway, legislation and regulation aside, let's think about these four areas and what sorts of cloud approaches we might take as a result. So we'll start over on the bottom right corner and non-core support activities. So typically these are the things that business needs to be able to be a business. Support functions, and you would likely to be seeing things here like HR, like finance in terms of transactional finance, accounts payable, accounts receivable, legal, those kind of areas. And for these areas, if you're putting in systems to support these kind of things, I think the first question you should be asking is actually, should those services be run in-house at all? And I've recently come across a term of business process as a service, adding yet more abbreviations and acronyms to what is already a very confused world, but I think this is quite an interesting one, which is the idea of actually you outsource a service in its entirety. I think a good example of this, there are many of them, but the one that I'm running with at the moment is the idea of travel services. So the company I work for today, we use American Express Travel, and that actually means that we have a whole load of effectively IT systems that are used by people in the organisation to be able to book travel, book hotels and so on. and that is effectively software as a service, except we don't pay for it as software. The billing of that is built within the overhead of the travel service. So when we buy a plane ticket, then Amex are taking some sort of cut of that fare. And actually, often within organisations, although there's lots of technology around this, they won't be regarded as in any way an IT thing, because they're not sort of billed through and accounted for through the IT budgets. And I think in lots of organisations now we're starting to see a proliferation of these kind of services, and often they become very disintegrated with both the corporate backends, but with each other as well. I guess the other area that you would be looking at in here would be software as a service. We're starting to see the emergence now of cloud-based software as a service with things like ERP. And then in the more traditional world, pre-cloud, this very much would have been the packaged software area. So non-core support functions. The next quadrant that we'll look at is support functions for the core business. What is the core business is very much a strategic decision within an organisation, and just as an illustration of that, no consultant who once went to work in a shopping centre and was dealing with the general manager of the shopping centre and was very surprised to find that the shopping centre employed its own security staff. When the general manager explained it, what he said was that the service that he was providing was a safe and pleasant environment for shoppers to be able to shop to his customers, who were the retailers who were hiring space there. And because the safe environment was so core to the proposition of what they were offering, he felt it was very important that actually it was his security staff, where most companies these days, I guess, would see security as something you'd immediately outsource. Anyway, putting aside what is core, what is non-core, because that's a local business decision, the sorts of things that we might see in here might be things like sales processing systems, and although that's something that is core to the business, it's not actually in its own right generating revenue. It's something that is indirectly generating revenue. It's the transactional part, it's enabling the revenue to be generated. In terms of cloud models for here, I think that this very much is the software as a service area, and that's because it's unlikely that support functions, even for things like sales, are going to give you anything that's going to differentiate you from your competitors. So if you build this stuff yourself on infrastructure or platform as a service, or indeed build it for yourself on premise, what you're doing is you're building something that is going to become a millstone for you, because your competitors will be just using something that have bought off the shelf. This again will be an area that lots of stuff we will see today on-prem, and I'd imagine that actually lots of it will stay on premises as well, because of the amount of investment there has been over the years. There's lots of legacy in this space, sales processing systems in particular. I think in terms of the financial thinking around this, software as a service, but software as a service paid for on a user's basis, how many people you have doing sales processing rather than using basis, how many sales you are actually processing, because if you're doing lots of them, hopefully you want to be able to make sure that you're not getting a flat overhead on every sale. As you make more sales, you'd like to be able to see a reduction in your proportionate overhead. Next up, top left-hand corner, core activities that generate revenue. This is again an area which is very much down to the strategic decisions within an organisation, but the sorts of things you might see here. Probably the easiest one to explain is e-commerce, and the ability to be able to directly drive revenue through systems, through website transactions. I'd also say that many organisations would see CRM in this space, although whether that's been realised or not by many is another question. And as such, with those, you will see software as a service, you will see platform as a service, and you will see infrastructure as a service, because these are the areas where people can develop systems that will differentiate them from the marketplace. CRM doesn't fall into that, but e-commerce, you can see that some organisations are going to set themselves apart by the way in which they do e-commerce. Organisations like Amazon have very much done that. But you also will find people using software as a service, so companies like Vendor who are providing e-commerce services on a software as a service basis for retailers who want to have an online presence as opposed to retailers who are only doing stuff online. Again, you're going to see on-premise here. For the online stuff, it makes more sense to have it in cloud because it needs to be cloud accessible because it's online. But for the back office stuff, for CRM and whatever, there may be issues around particularly customer confidentiality, which will be big inhibitors to people moving to the cloud. The final area then to look at is the top right-hand corner, which is non-core but revenue generating, and this is effectively R&D effort within an organisation. What might be the things that you can do in the future? And as such, this stuff is infrastructure service, platform as a service, because this is where you want to be able to experiment with things, have them up and running, and then ideally, in good Boston Matrix kind of way, you want to be able to see how the ones that are generated over here that work migrate across over to things that generate revenue as core business. And the as you use it model of charging that both infrastructure and platform as a service generally have associated with them is really good there, because it means you don't have capital investment to be able to get the thing up and running with hardware and software costs. You can get it up and running. If it works well, then you can think about how you scale it by moving over top left, but if it doesn't work well, then you can just kill it and the amount that you've invested is a minimum. So there we go. Hopefully that makes some sense. Welcome comments, feedback either on my blog or on the YouTube channel, where I'm sure you can feedback as well. Thanks for listening.